on to episode 22 of Halloween Horror Review Season 4, down to the very final 3 episodes. So what's going to be the first of these final 3 episodes we're doing? Well, it seems like, for this one, we're about to check out a vampire movie that teaches us that there are some things we should be afraid of in the dark.
Drop on by the Clown Cafe. Drop on by the Clown Cafe. The grub is downright gruesome, but your appetite's obey. 'Cause food's a little funny, food's a little funny, food's a little funny at the Clown Cafe. Drop on by the Clown Cafe, your favorite meals on wheels. The menu is disgusting and it's full of special deals. Nothing here is good for you, so grab yourself a tray. 'Cause food's a little funny at the Clown Cafe. Drop on by the Clown Cafe. Drop on by the Clown Cafe. Gobble up your order quick before it runs away. 'Cause food's a little funny at the Clown Cafe. Why not visit after school and have yourselves a bite? An appetizing appetizer certain to delight. We haven't done it right unless it makes your teeth decay. 'Cause food's a little funny at the Clown Cafe. Drop on by the Clown Cafe. Drop on by the Clown Cafe. The grub is downright gruesome, but your appetites obey. 'Cause food's a little funny, food's a little funny, food's a little funny at the Clown Cafe.
Hey everyone, it's Don G. Corleone here, and I'm here with episode 22 of Halloween Horror Movie Reviews Season 4. And for this episode, we're going to yet another vampire film. And this time it's for one also set in the 80s. And it was 2 years before the other 80s vampire classic. And unlike that vampire classic, this one only got 1 sequel and 2 remakes. And this was for the first horror film to be done by the director of Child's Play himself, Tom Holland. No, not the Tom Holland you're thinking of. A different one. Much older one. And that film is going to be for none other than 1985's Fright Night. And what's the plot of this movie? Well, the plot is, the film focuses on this young teenager named Charlie Brewster, where nothing could be better for him than an old horror movie late at night. But then, of course, one night, 2 men move in next door. And for Charlie with his horror movie experience, there could be no doubt that there is a vampire in there and his guardian. The only one who can help him hunt them down is a washed-up old horror movie actor named Peter Vincent, who hosts Charlie's favorite TV show, Fright Night. But there's a problem though. Peter Vincent was recently fired, and he doesn't really believe vampires even exist. So, how's this made? Well, while writing the script for Cloak and Dagger, Tom Holland accused himself when he conceived the idea of a horror movie fan becoming convinced that his next-door neighbor was a vampire. But he did not initially think this premise was enough to sustain a story. So, Holland asked himself what he would do. And because everybody would think he'd be mad. The story percolated in his mind for a year, and finally one day while discussing with John Byers, the head of the story department at Columbia Pictures at the time, he finally figured out what the boy would do. He'd probably go, thinking he'd go to a place, someone who was like Vincent Price. In that era, many local TV stations in the United States had horror hosts like Zerkirls and Sven Goel and nationally syndicated Elvira. So Holland decided it would be natural for the boy to seek aid from his local host. And the minute he had Peter Vincent, he had the story, Charlie Brewster would be the engine, Peter Vincent was the heart of the story. And once he could see the character, Holland knocked out the first draft of the script in 3 weeks, and he was laughing the entire time on the floor, kicking his feet in the air in hysterics. And Holland wrote the film for himself to direct, in part because he was so disheartened by the film that was ultimately made from his previous screenplay, Scream for Help, and developed enough clout from the success of screenplays for films like Class of 1984, Psycho 2, and Cloak and Dagger, that the head of Corleone Pictures said that he'd take a chance on the hot screamer kid and figured Fright Night would be as successful as it ultimately became. And the Peter Vincent character, well, he was named after horror icons Peter Cushing and Vincent Price, and Holland specifically wrote the part for Price. But at this point in his career, Price had been so badly typecast he had stopped accepting roles in horror movies. A guy named Corleone, the head of Corleone Pictures, by then, suggested Roddy McDowall for the part. McDowall had already starred in the Holland Penn film Class of 1984, so Holland was immediately receptive of the suggestion. He understood the part that Holland commented, and also understood what he could do with it and really wanted it. McDowall was even interested in the Genesis clips of the old, McDowall was also interested in the genesis of the character. He said that in the film, he'd perform as being in his late 20s or early 30s in the film, and clips of his old movies all the way up to his 60s, and when he was washed up it had been. McDowall even added that the role was interesting to him because, well, he had never played anything that old. And Holland and McDowall built a lasting friendship. McDowall eventually invited Holland to a dinner party where he introduced him to Vincent Price, who was flattered that the part was a homage to him and commented that the film was wonderful and thought Roddy McDowall did a great job. And then when it came to casting the vampire, Chris Sarandon's agent gave him a copy of the script, and he replied that there was no way he could do a horror movie, but he decided to give the script a once-over and was immediately captivated by it. He thought it was one of the best scripts he had read in a long time, claimed Sarandon, and thought it was beautifully constructed. It was obvious that it was going to be a labor of love for him. It was clear that the writer-director's approach to it was one of wanting to have fun with the genre without making fun of it. The characters were beautifully drawn, is what he thought. Sarandon was also worried about being typecast as villain, but the script resonated with him because the story was deeper than just some average monster film. He claimed that he'd forgot about vampirism, but what this film was about on one level was an older man trying to take a younger man's girl away from him, that Holland commented. And though he liked the screenplay, Sarandon was still leery of working with a first-time director, so he flew to Los Angeles to meet Holland producer Herb Jaffe. Holland and he had immediate rapports, and they went on to make several more films together, including the first Child's Play movie. And Sarandon was odd that Holland had the film so completely mapped out that he had literally described the movie shot by shot all the way through, page by page, scene by scene, was basically the way he shot it. So anyway, after this whole movie was shot and marketed, Fright Night would go on to be released to the public on August 2nd, 1985. And at the box office, it grossed over $24.9 million worldwide. Ever since this movie was released, it received positive reviews from critics and horror fans, and has since become a cult classic. Fright Night would get followed by a sequel called Fright Night Part 2 in 1988 that was quickly forgotten about and nobody really knows its existence. In fact, a lot of people have never heard its existence because it seems like it was kind of only released on VHS and never on DVD. So I don't think anybody even knows about that movie's existence. And then it got a remake in 2011, which starred Colin Farrell and Anton Yelchin in the two lead roles. Then in that turn, it was followed by another remake, which is supposed to be a homage sequel, Fright Night 2 New Blood, in 2013 direct-to-video. Then, in October 2020, Holland had confirmed he was writing a direct sequel to the original film titled Fright Night Resurrection that would have brought back characters from the original film and would ignore the 1988 sequel. So far there's been no update on it, and I hope there's never an update. So I hope it never gets made, because it would probably be a horrible idea, knowing requels today are turning out to be. Now as for my reaction to this movie, well, ever since I first saw this movie in middle school, this has always been tied with The Lost Boys as my favorite vampire movie ever. Although I didn't see The Lost Boys till 2020, this I saw first. The direction is great, the atmosphere is great, the performances and characters are all great, and it's just an epic, gruesome blast. Fright Night's about this kid named Charlie Brewster who discovers accidentally that his new neighbor, Jerry Danridge, is a vampire. And it was about Charlie and his friends and Peter Vincent setting out to destroy this vampire. But Mr. Danridge is no slouch and is more of a threat to them than they are to him. And essentially, the setup is that this film was intended for teens. And although the fashions, as with almost all things 80s, quickly became outdated, the ideas still remain the same. Instead of the pretentious gothic hue that the most vampire movies fall into, this one just tries to be this hip, fun movie to watch. And besides being one of the best horror films of the 80s, it's also one of the best movies of the entire 80s. The movie's full of great performances, especially Chris Sarandon as Jerry Danridge and Ryan McDowell, rest in peace, as TV vampire slayer Peter Vincent. It has fantastic makeup effects that are sorely missing from today's horror flicks, and it combines this great feel of horror with a realistic touch of comedy and drama. It's very interesting to see a film with vampires when they're portrayed as scary rather than your average soap opera characters. Like, and it kind of makes it clear that whenever anyone says that Sarandon's performance as a vampire Jerry Danridge has a charisma, so that you buy it when he seduces someone. And if you compare Danridge and Dracula, because what Fright usually is, it's kind of contemporary take on the classic vampire. It doesn't try to create new rules or reboot classic universal vampire lore. It simply elaborates on it. Like, we never saw what would have happened in Dracula when most Dracula adaptations if Van Helsing ever holds up the cross. And in Fright Nights, it's usually the equivalent of jabbing someone with a red-hot brand. And when it comes to Ryan McDowell's performance as Peter Vincent, Ryan McDowell turns into this very, very fun turn as Fright Night's interpretation of the character Peter Vincent. He's a washed-up film star who's been reduced to hosting a horror movie show that shows. He has the know-how, and he is crippled by his cowardice and greed. In the role of the brave boy, though, he's willing to risk his life and bloom to protect his neighborhood and girlfriend. And it's young Charlie Brewster, who's played by William Ragsdale. He's the main character of our story. And after all, he even plays a role of naivety and yet an undying persistence to stop this creature that threatens him and his community. And all this all common parallels Charlie's girlfriend Amy and his best friend Evil Ed. They don't believe Charlie, but are concerned for him and enlist Vincent's help. The design of the vampire is the least faithful thing with the classic idea of the vampire, well, the universal vampire anyways, and when the vampires become hungry, they turn to more ravenous takes on Nosferatu. But the vampires can also transform, and these effects are pretty good, and one of the best involves just a quick effect with a wolf's eyes. Fright Night's like usually, it's this hip, witty, and enterprising attempt to bring vampires up to date. And it doesn't do so much deconstruct the genre the way Scream would eventually do his slasher movies a decade after this. It reconstructs itself for a whole new day and age while still remaining true to its origins. And you can tell here that director Tom Holland is this horror film aficionado. And after all, the heroes of the piece are a horror movie fan and a former horror movie star. And Holland also wrote the script and made sure they're very well versed in everything that there is to know about vampires. And all the traditional aspects are here. The vampires suck blood, they sleep in coffins, they turn into bats and wolves, sunlight and stakes are deadly to them, and they can't stand crosses and holy water. The only difference is instead of living in gloomy mansions and gothic castles, they now live in suburbia. In Fright Nights, it's also a rather appealing attempt to update vampire mythology, and achieves it with a remarkable degree of success and certainty. And there's no small mark to Tom Holland's confident and assured direction, but the astutely observed performances of the cast and goes some way towards making Fright Night a winner. When it comes to more of Holland's direction and screenplay, Holland's witty and intelligent screenplay frames its ideas as very inspired dimensions, and it's a knowing and very self-aware film, and that extends to the characters too. In particular, Jerry Danridge, and writer-director Tom Holland's script is tight and engaging, following the vampire routine while still working towards surprises along the way. And quirky humor is often scattered throughout the film, and most prevalent in Charlie and Amy's lover spat, and Charlie's loudmouth single mom who assures that new neighbor Jerry is probably kind of gay with her luck. And Fright Night is still a horror film, by all means. Though there has some unusually charming moments of humor, and Charlie's struggle to convince those around that he's dealing with a vampire, and gives the film a lightness that is reminiscent of the 80s and early 90s Halloween television films. Even though it's gorier, it kind of shows off some evil. Although, technically it's not really that gory, but it does show some, Evil Dead-esque special effects in the finale, too. Right here, as Evil Dead was kind of the horror film that inspired all these, 80s horror film effects. And he usually finds the classic vampire films of yesteryear to be more amusing and shocking, and assumes, the same of other people. Nobody's taking the vampire mythos seriously around this time. It's kind of that much easier to genuine vampires like himself to go about their nighty hunting unopposed. And this vampire also doesn't have to leave home either. This is clever, borderline scary observation. But Fright Night's more than just a postmodern take on the genre. It's also an excellent horror film in its own right. All achieves this tremendous amount of atmosphere from half-lit camera angles and reasonably effective soundtrack, and some of the selections admittedly do date the film, and some of the more subtle rhythms pulse through the background to this unsettling effect. And it's quite a tour de force of special effects work. There was FX in this movie that are staggering for 1985, much better so than most modern films today. And scenes that spring to mind are this vampire turning into a wolf and back again, a decomposing corpse, and Danvers' death sequence. They're as impressive as anything you've probably seen in many other 80s horror films. And when it comes to more of Chris Sarandon is terrific as the nasty vampire Jerry Danvers who excludes in equal quantities like both menace and sexual magnetism. And even his encounterments with both his assistant Billy Cole and one of Charlie's friends Evil Ed, such that Danvers isn't that fussy about who he seduces, and while William Ragsdale, Burst, and Stephens all give good performances as the youngsters pitted against him. And Roddy McDowall is easily the best of the protagonists here. His appearance as the somewhat cowardly vampire slayer Peter Vincent is a joy to behold. And he effectively sends out the greats of horror film with whom his character is named. Like, Peter Vincent is usually this amalgam or throwback to Peter Cushing and Vincent Price. And I kind of like Peter Vincent's character right here. We'll get to him in a bit, but one of the film's greatest strengths lies its lively performances. And more about their performances. William Ragsdale convinces you of his role as Charlie Brewster because he's slightly paranoid. He's a slightly paranoid horror movie fan with a bit too much curiosity with its adolescent mind. And though we do a good job of scenes of the first two of Danvers' victims, when you see those long distorted fingernails, you kind of get those Nosferatu feels here, and right here, like. And of course, he's kind of the typical protagonist where he finds out about the danger and tries to warn people of the danger, and nobody believes him for a while until they find out he's telling the truth. Then you have Roddy McDowall, who proves his acting ability in the role of the vampire hunter Peter Vincent, who, when we first meet him, he's his show host. Then, of course, once we get to the next scene when Charlie decides to think he could go to his idol, Peter Vincent, we find out Peter Vincent was fired because a generation doesn't believe in vampires, but Charlie convinces Peter Vincent that he believes in vampires to get him to foil Jerry Danvers' plans. In the beginning, he's put aside by Charlie's newfound desire to kill his supposed neighbor, but he just does decide to go with him and his friends to his house to see if Jerry is a vampire, but Jerry decides to obviously use his intelligence stuff to convince them he's not a vampire. So they leave the house, but as they're about to leave the house, Peter Vincent does see through his little mirror, has the little mirror thing, and he starts to realize that maybe Jerry is a vampire, and that Charlie is actually telling him the truth. And then he's by then convinced when being attacked by Evil Ed, he decides that he has to take down the bloodsucker of the neighborhood for real, not from an actual show this time. So I like his character here. And the director just keeps this tight rein on affairs, and even mocking the genre but also never insulting its films or its fans. He faithfully adheres to the recognized rules of vampire movies, squeezing laughs from the absurdity of Charlie's Pit, and still manages to run plenty of scares. And both the makeup and visual effects are very good, and includes some nicely realized vampire makeup for Sarandon, Bears, and Joffreys. The great bat monster and a wonderful scene where Evil Ed, impaled on a balustrade, slowly reverts from wolf shape back to human form. But more importantly, the director himself, Holland, never allows the effects to blunt the horror or the humor. Yes, Fright Night's an involving scare show, but it's also a darkly humorous film at the same time. Especially true to Roddy McDowall's hilarious turn as Peter Vincent. And sometimes McDowall was sometimes known to be this hammy actor, but with Peter Vincent, he around this time found a character that allowed him to flex his theatricality with the benefit of a tight script that forced him to toughen up. So Fright Night is literally more than just a postmodern take on the genre. It's also an excellent horror film in its own right. Holland achieves a tremendous amount of atmosphere from half-lit camera angles and a reasonably effective soundtrack, and some of the selections admittedly do date the film, and some of the more subtle rhythms pull pulls through the background to the unsettling effect. And another good point it has is the soundtrack. Because the score, dude, Brad Fiedler does not disappoint here. Because he also did a soundtrack for Terminator, the first one. He definitely does not disappoint with this one either. The music is perfect for all the sexy scenes and is appropriate for the creepier scenes as well. And there's even a club scene and a sex scene, well, not entirely a sex scene, which shows how perfect the music in this film is. And yeah, this film has comedy, and I like the level of comedy in this movie, because it's more of a smart horror movie with clever lines. It's not like the Joss Whedon type comedy, like with Justice Week, or any of the modern Marvel films today. It's much more than a slapstick horror comedy. The comedy gets lesser towards the end, and it becomes more of a serious horror movie. Even with some dark humor, it doesn't seem distracting enough. Like, Ryan McDowell is an actor in this movie, who suddenly gets thrusted into this whole situation, and his lines are definitely funny, especially his line about slashers. And an additional point which many kind of do ignore is when it comes to the movie, it's the performance of Jonathan Stark, who is quite creepy in his role as Billy, Jerry Danridge's assistant. The character, even when being no assistant, the character when being overshadowed by Danridge, presents a silent menace. One of the creepier elements of the movie, no doubt. And for final showdowns, like I usually mention in my reviews, this movie easily has one of my favorite final showdowns in any vampire movie ever. Because in here, the assistant Billy appears, knocks Charlie over the banister, and while Peter flees to Charlie's house, he's surprised by Evil Ed, who attacks him in the form of a wolf because Jerry Danridge had pretty much possessed him in an alley once Evil Ed was all alone. Only if he pierces through the heart with this broken table leg held by Peter, and removing the stake from Ed's body, Peter then decides he has to go rescue Charlie and battle Jerry. So Charlie, after being captured, is locked in with Amy, who gets slowly transformed into a vampire because Jerry Danridge had also kidnapped and possessed her. Peter frees him before she can awaken, and says the process can be reversed if they destroy Jerry before dawn. So Billy confronts Charlie and Peter, and is revealed to be undead. They destroy Billy, he melts into goo and sand, so Billy's dead, and Peter's able to lure the overconfident Jerry in front of a window using a crucifix, which now works because of his renewed faith in its abilities. So the sun rises, then Jerry transforms to a bat and attacks Peter and Charlie before fleeing to his coffin in the basement. But Charlie and Peter pursue Jerry, and the latter breaks open Jerry's coffin and tries to stake him through the heart while Charlie fights off Amy, who's almost completed her transformation. By breaking the blacked out windows in the basement, Peter and Charlie has successfully exposed Jerry to the sunlight, and they destroy him, and after Jerry is officially destroyed and dead, Amy is returned to her human form. Then we get another scene where it takes place several nights later. Likely a few months though. Peter is now rehired by the studio, and he's back to doing his Fright Night TV series. And then he announces a hiatus from vampires, because he's going to be presenting a film about alien invaders instead, winning back his crowd. So Charlie and Amy are then shown watching the program, and they embrace in bed. Charlie then gets up to turn off the TV, and he sees red eyes in Jerry's now vacant house, but he dismisses them, and he decides to go back, and goes back to sleeping with Amy. And Charlie and Amy are now back together because in the first half of the movie she dumped him, but they kind of reconcile as the film progresses, and now they're back together as a couple. But what they don't know, a new neighbor just moved in. And then you hear Evil Ed's infamous quote and laugh, "Oh, Brewster, you're so cool." And the movie ends right there. Roll the credits. What makes it great is that it kind of tells you they did destroy the evil, but did they really? Is everything really over? Is that whole house safe now? Or is another vampire gonna take Jerry's place there? Or maybe even a werewolf? You never know. It could not be over. There could still be another vampire taking Jerry's place in that house. Or another bad creature like a werewolf. So it's an ambiguous ending. Would the movie have any bad qualities though? Well, let's get to that now. For starters, the runtime is a little bit long, and some scenes could probably be trimmed a few seconds or a minute to pick up the pace. And music and clothing sometimes also dates the film, but it may not necessarily be a bad thing. And the audience, we find out a little too early that Charlie's right about Jerry. he really is a vampire. Like, more ambiguity until at least Vincent spots he has no reflection would have worked better. So it just kind of becomes a little bit predictable that the audience is way ahead of everybody else in the cast except for Charlie. Like, even, like, Child's Play, you kind of knew that, you already kind of knew this Chucky doll Andy got for his birthday was the serial killer Charles Lee Ray. But at first they do kind of a good job not letting you believe it, because when Andy first got Chucky didn't really move yet. We never really saw him move. It was until Andy went to bed with Chucky that we saw Chucky kill Andy's aunt, who was watching him that night. And then you started to wonder, and then you kind of started to have a bit of that suspicious little feeling. But the thing is, though, Andy did not even know it was a serial killer possessed doll. Either. He thought it was a normal good guy doll. And then you started to get more feeling that it really was a serial killer possessed doll, because the next morning after Andy's aunt's death, Chucky then told Andy to go to take him to Eddie's house and cut school so that Chucky could, and Charles Ray possessed by, could go kill Eddie in revenge for abandoning him. Right there. So I wish that could have worked. That could have happened with Fright Nights. Then we shouldn't have had to find out that Jerry was a vampire way too early. But overall, though, those are not going to ruin the movie for me, because I think Fright Night is still an epic blast and the best or second best vampire movie I have ever seen. In the end, Fright Night is easily worth the watch and buy for horror movie fans and vampire movie fans that want to see one of the most iconic vampire films of the 80s. Anyways, that's it for my view of Fright Night. If you're wondering how I'm going to rank Fright Night, here's how I'm going to rank this movie. So overall, if you are a fan of the vampire genre or horror movie genre in general, then totally watch and buy Fright Night for your collection, no doubt, because this is one of those horror films that deserves to be seen by everyone that is a horror movie fan and a vampire fan. And if you're wondering how I'm going to rank Fright Night, I'm going to give Fright Night a 9 out of 10. There we go. That wraps up my review for Fright Night. So you're wondering, what is going to be the next episode? Well, our next episode is going to be for a film from a shitty horror film festival from the 2000s. One that had like 4 years of a run and then stopped because these films were so shitty. But there's a catch though. This was going to be for their only one I liked that wasn't garbage and actually good, which is really shocking to say. The film is called Borderland, not the video game. A 2007 horror film that was part of that shitty A Films to Die For festival. That's going to be our next episode. But until then, guys, that'll be it for this episode. Thank you all for watching. If you like this, want to see more, and don't forget to like, subscribe to Don G. Corleone.